The sleek black car pulled up to the curb outside Miller's Diner, its glossy exterior reflecting the warm glow of the neon sign overhead. The street was quiet except for the soft hum of passing cars and the occasional chatter of pedestrians heading home after a long day. The diner, a well-loved establishment known for its comfort food and cozy atmosphere, had been part of the community for years. Its welcoming yellow lights spilled onto the sidewalk, inviting in anyone seeking a good meal and a friendly smile. Inside the vehicle, David Sinclair sat in the passenger seat, his sharp eyes scanning the restaurant's entrance. He was a man of precision, a billionaire who had built his restaurant empire from the ground up. But tonight, there were no boardrooms, no luxury suits, no assistants whispering schedules in his ear. Tonight, he wasn't a CEO, he was just another customer. His driver, an older man named Greg, turned slightly in his seat. "Are you sure you don't want me to go in first, sir?" "Just to make sure." David waved him off. "No need, I want to see everything for myself." Greg hesitated before nodding. He had worked for David for years and knew better than to argue when his boss had made up his mind. David reached for the door handle and stepped out, adjusting his hoodie over his head. He had dressed down, faded jeans, a simple black hoodie, and worn sneakers, clothes that wouldn't draw attention. His goal wasn't to be recognized. It was to observe, to experience the restaurant as an ordinary patron, to see if his employees were being treated well. As he walked toward the entrance, a cold gust of wind rushed through the street, ruffling his hoodie. He pulled it tighter, his mind already working. This wasn't the first time he had done this. He had visited his other restaurants before, slipping in unnoticed to see how things truly operated when no one knew he was watching. But something about tonight felt different. He reached for the diner's door handle and pulled it open. Immediately, a wave of warmth and the scent of sizzling bacon, fresh bread, and brewed coffee wrapped around him. The soft hum of conversation mixed with the faint sound of silverware clinking against plates. The place was busy but not chaotic, filled with customers chatting over late dinners. A young hostess with a bright, welcoming smile approached. "Good evening, table for one." David nodded. "Yeah, just here to grab a bite." As she led him through the diner, he took everything in. The tables were clean, the servers moved efficiently, and the cooks behind the counter worked with practiced ease. It looked good on the surface. Then, a sound caught his attention. A muffled sob. His gaze flicked toward the kitchen. The door swung open briefly as a waitress hurried past, and for just a split second, he saw her, a young woman near the sink, her head lowered, wiping tears from her face. David's jaw tightened. Something was wrong. David leaned forward slightly, his senses now on high alert. Something about the way the waitress rushed out of the kitchen, her eyes red and puffy, made his stomach twist. He had seen plenty of workplaces in his life, some good, some terrible, but nothing angered him more than seeing an employee being mistreated. He waved down a passing server, a young man with a friendly face and a name tag that read Jake. Jake hesitated for a second, then approached with a polite smile. "Everything all right?" Jake asked, placing a menu on the table. David kept his tone casual. "Yeah, just deciding what to order." He paused, lowering his voice slightly. "But I couldn't help noticing, someone in the kitchen looked upset." "Everything okay back there?" Jake's smile faltered, and a flicker of hesitation crossed his face. He glanced toward the kitchen as if checking to see who might be listening. Then, after a brief moment, he sighed and leaned in. "It's Lisa," he said in a hushed tone. "She's been working double shifts all week. Her mom's really sick, and she's trying to cover the hospital bills." David's fingers tightened around the edge of the menu. He knew what that kind of struggle felt like. He had come from nothing, clawing his way up from poverty. He had seen his mother work herself to the bone just to keep food on the table. The memory of it still burned inside him. Jake continued. "She asked for a short break earlier. Just 5 minutes, but Mr. Carson, our manager, snapped at her. He's been on her case all night." David's jaw clenched. "What do you mean, on her case?" Jake hesitated again. "Carson's, well, he's a real hard ass. He runs this place like a drill sergeant. Sometimes he's fine, but when he's in a bad mood, he takes it out on us. And tonight, Lisa's his target." David exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. He couldn't react yet, not until he saw it for himself. "Thanks for telling me," he said, giving Jake a nod. "I'll have the house special." Jake scribbled the order down, then hurried off. David didn't touch the menu again. He wasn't here for the food anymore. He was watching, waiting. And when the kitchen door swung open again, he got a clearer view inside. Lisa was at the sink, furiously scrubbing dishes. Her back was turned, but he could see her shoulders shaking slightly. And standing near her, arms crossed and face twisted in irritation, was Mr. Carson. Even from here, David could tell. This man enjoyed making others miserable. David sat back, his eyes fixed on the kitchen. He didn't move, didn't blink. He had spent years studying people, understanding how power worked. He knew when someone was a strict boss, and when someone was a bully. And Carson, he was a bully. The kitchen door swung open again, and David finally got a good look at him. Middle-aged, stocky, a permanent scowl on his face. The kind of guy who probably thought barking orders made him important. David watched closely as Carson stalked toward Lisa. "You're too slow," Carson snapped. Lisa didn't turn around. She just kept scrubbing, her hands moving faster. David's fingers curled into a fist beneath the table. Carson stepped closer. "Did you hear me?" Lisa flinched but nodded. "Yes, sir." "Then why are you still moving like a damn snail?" Carson barked. Lisa swallowed hard. I'm trying my best." Carson scoffed. "Your best? This is your best?" He laughed, shaking his head. "No wonder you're stuck washing dishes. Pathetic." David inhaled slowly through his nose, forcing himself to stay seated. His blood boiled, but he needed to see how far Carson would go. Lisa stiffened, gripping the edge of the sink. Her knuckles turned white. I just need 5 minutes, she said quietly. Carson let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Oh, you need 5 minutes. Are you the boss now?" Lisa shook her head quickly. "No, Carson slammed his hand on the counter next to her. "No breaks," he snapped. "Not until I say so. You think the customers care that your mom's sick? You think they care that you're tired? No one cares, Lisa. If you can't handle this, then quit." A tear slipped down Lisa's cheek. She quickly wiped it away, nodding mutely. David gritted his teeth. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. That was it. He had seen enough. David stood. He moved with purpose, his footsteps steady but controlled. He was done watching. The tension in the kitchen crackled like static electricity. Carson loomed over Lisa, his face twisted in frustration, his voice sharp enough to cut through the air. Lisa kept her head down, scrubbing the dishes as if her life depended on it. Her hands trembled, her knuckles raw from the endless hours of work. Carson wasn't finished. He took a step closer, his voice dropping into a mocking whisper. "You know what, maybe I should start looking for someone who actually wants this job. Someone who can handle the pressure. Because clearly, you can't." Lisa bit her lip, her breath coming out in short, uneven bursts. She didn't dare lift her head. Then, from the other side of the kitchen, a loud crash shattered the tense silence. A plate slipped from a cook's hands and smashed onto the floor. The entire kitchen staff froze. Carson whirled around, his face darkening like a brewing storm. "Are you all incompetent?" he barked. His voice echoed through the kitchen, making everyone flinch. The cook stammered, bending down quickly to clean the mess. I'm sorry, sir, it was an accident." "An accident?" Carson scoffed. "You think customers care about accidents? You think the owner of this company would tolerate this level of stupidity?" Lisa finally lifted her gaze, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "It was just one plate," she said quietly. Carson snapped his head back toward her. "Oh, now you're defending mistakes." He took a slow, deliberate step toward her, his voice dripping with venom. "Maybe if you weren't so distracted crying over your pathetic life, you'd actually do your damn job." Lisa's breath hitched. The humiliation clawed at her chest, the weight of exhaustion and helplessness pressing down on her. David, standing just outside the kitchen, had seen enough. He exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders back. His patience had run out. It was time to act. David stepped forward, his presence cutting through the chaos like a knife. The kitchen door swung open as he walked in, and the entire staff turned their heads toward him. The air in the room seemed to shift, the oppressive weight of Carson's cruelty giving way to something else. Authority. Carson spun around, his frustration morphing into confusion. His beady eyes narrowed as he took in the newcomer, the man in a simple hoodie and jeans, standing there like he owned the place. "Who the hell are you?" Carson demanded. David took another step forward, his piercing blue eyes locking onto the man. "I'm David Sinclair," he said, his voice calm yet ice-cold. "And I own this place." Silence. The kitchen froze. Lisa's eyes widened in shock. The cook who had dropped the plate nearly stumbled back. Jake, the friendly server, peeked into the kitchen, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. Carson's face drained of color. He took an involuntary step backward, his lips parting as if to say something, anything, but no words came out. David let the silence stretch, let the weight of his presence sink in. Then he took another step closer, his voice dropping into something dangerously quiet. You've got about 5 seconds to explain why you're treating my employees like dirt. Carson's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. His bravado crumbled under David's icy gaze. He knew he was in deep trouble. "Yes, sir, I was just trying to maintain discipline." David cut him off with a slight tilt of his head. Discipline. His tone was razor sharp. By humiliating a hard-working employee. By refusing breaks. By making people cry. Carson swallowed hard. She's too slow. I was just. David turned to Lisa. "Lisa, how long have you worked here?" Lisa hesitated before answering, her voice barely above a whisper. 2 years, sir." David nodded, his gaze never wavering. "And has this been happening the whole time?" Lisa bit her lip and gave a small, reluctant nod. "Yes, to me, 2 others." David inhaled deeply. That was all he needed to hear. He turned back to Carson, his voice no longer quiet. "You're fired." The words hit like a thunderclap. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade about to drop. "You're fired." Carson's face twisted in shock, then disbelief. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was as if his brain was struggling to process what had just happened. The mighty, arrogant manager, who had spent years ruling over his staff with an iron fist, had just been dismissed in front of everyone. His face turned red, a mix of rage and desperation flickering in his eyes. "Why you can't do this?" he stammered. I've been running this place for years. You need me." David's expression didn't change. He remained calm, controlled, and terrifyingly firm. "I don't need anyone who disrespects my employees," David said coldly. "And I definitely don't need someone who abuses their power." Carson's hands clenched into fists. He was teetering on the edge, his pride too big to accept defeat. "I was just enforcing rules. Keeping the place efficient." His voice cracked, desperation creeping in. "You don't understand how hard it is to." "I understand perfectly," David cut him off. His voice was low but carried the weight of absolute authority. "I built this company from the ground up. I started off as a dishwasher, just like Lisa." He turned his head slightly toward the young woman, his gaze softening for the first time. Lisa's lips parted slightly in shock. David looked back at Carson. "And I know what it's like to work under a terrible boss. That's why I swore none of my employees would ever go through what I did. And yet, here you are." Carson swallowed hard. He was losing ground. He could feel the walls closing in, the stares of his staff burning into his back. Then David took one last step forward, towering over him. "Collect your things and get out." Carson's body tensed, his fists trembling. For a brief second, it looked like he might fight back, might argue, might beg. Then, defeat. His shoulders slumped. His breath came out in a short, bitter exhale. He turned on his heel and stormed toward the door, shoving past stunned employees as he went. His once powerful presence shattered into nothing. The moment the door slammed shut behind him, the entire kitchen exhaled. It was like a weight had been lifted off their chests. And then, softly, hesitantly, someone clapped. The single clap was quickly followed by another. And another. Then, like a wave rushing through the room, the entire staff erupted into applause. Lisa blinked, looking around in disbelief. Were they cheering? The young cook who had dropped the plate grinned. Jake, the server, gave a sharp whistle. Even the head chef, a usually serious man, gave a small nod of approval. Lisa turned back to David, stunned. You really fired him?" she asked, as if she still couldn't believe it. David gave a small nod. "I don't tolerate bullies." Lisa swallowed hard, emotion swirling in her chest. This felt surreal. For 2 years, she had endured Carson's torment. 2 years of stress, humiliation, exhaustion. And now, he was gone. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, they weren't from sadness. David turned to the rest of the staff. "Listen up," he said, his voice carrying the same power as before, but now, it was different. Less anger, more resolve. This diner isn't just a business to me. It's a family. I built it on respect, on hard work, on treating people right. And that's how things are going to run from now on. The staff nodded, a newfound energy sparking in the room. Then David's eyes landed on Lisa again. He saw the exhaustion in her face, the quiet strength behind her tired eyes. "You need a break," he said simply. Lisa's lips parted. No arguments," David cut in, his tone softer now. "You've worked harder than anyone here, and I'm not about to let that go unnoticed." Lisa blinked rapidly, a mix of gratitude and disbelief washing over her. "Thank you, sir." David gave a small smirk. "Call me David." Lisa let out a soft laugh, wiping a tear from her cheek. Jake suddenly clapped his hands together. "All right, boss, since you're here, what do you say we serve you a meal?" "On the house," David chuckled. "I think I'd like that." As the staff moved to prepare his food, David took a deep breath, looking around. The energy in the diner had completely changed. The oppressive atmosphere, gone. The fear, gone. In its place, hope. This wasn't just a meal. It wasn't just a random visit. It was a new beginning.